Guy Jaquier was Chief Executive Officer of Prologis Private Capital. He oversaw their private capital funds and joint ventures with institutional real estate investors. Guy was also the Chief Investment Officer of A&B Property Corporation and started their international business. He served as its president of Europe and Asia, directing the establishment and expansion of their investment and operating platforms. He's an advisory board member of the UW Real Estate Program and also a board member of Operation Encore, a nonprofit veterans organization, and he leads a couch concert series. Hello, Guy. Thanks for coming on with us today.
Hey, Jeff. Glad to be here.
Guy, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Nolan, good to see you. And again, thanks for inviting me.
Great. Well, let's get going. So, Guy, help us to understand your background and how you connected with UW Runstad Department of Real Estate.
Long way around. I actually started digging ditches when I was 15 years old and working construction and packing lumber around and stuff on the east side. And I liked the job, but my boss had a better job. He had a pickup truck and got to run around and tell me what ditches to dig and stuff. And so I asked him, I said, how did you get your job? He said, I graduated from the University of Washington Department of Building Construction Management. I thought, well, that just seems like a much better job than I have. I should probably go to college and do that. So I did and graduated, and that's how I first got involved with, Gould Hall and all of that.
And then I guess fast forwarding a little bit, in the latter part of your career, how did you get involved with the Runstad program, kind of in its current iteration?
I was always very thankful to the program that got me out of digging ditches. And was able to navigate my way through the University of Washington on scholarships and fellowships and things. So, always felt a fond attachment for it. And when they were first starting it up, a guy named Jim Delisle was the first director, professor, whatever. He was it when he first started. And he had been the head of research at a company called Equitable Real Estate that I used to work at. So I knew Jim. And I was in San Francisco, and he, asked me if I wanted to come up and help, because he knew I was an alum. And, I got involved then, really from the start. So I've got to see it grow and evolve and through several of its iterations. And it's a great program.
So there's countless things we could talk about. I think today we kind of want to focus on working international or working within real estate internationally. High level, in your experience, broadly speaking, how does working in real estate internationally vary from doing it domestically?
Sure. In many ways, it's very similar because you're dealing with real estate, you're dealing with cash flow projections, you're dealing with risk and return. In other ways, it's very different, and I describe it as sort of the difference between playing checkers and multi-dimensional chess. You not only have supply, demand, and what's the rent for space, but you have foreign currency risk. And how do you hedge that, or can you self-hedge some of that? You have tax laws and tax structuring, and how do you get money in and out of countries efficiently and minimize your tax exposure? You have different legal regimens that you have to deal with as to what you can and can't do with your property rights. Just by way of example, like in the UK, you traditionally have very long-term leases. It's very landlord friendly. I think that's where they came up with the word landlord. You have pretty much all the rights, and the tenant doesn't have very many. And at the end, they have to clean up your building and leave it about how it was when they came in. In France, no matter what you write in the lease, pretty much the tenant has the right to break the lease every 3 years at their option. And no matter what you say on, extension options, they kind of have the right to stay there at sort of, some fair market value adjustment. So it's just different legally, and then culturally, it's just, different as to how you get business done.
What would you say the knock-on implications of that for, someone early on in their career that wants to launch, this international career, wants to work internationally, given those complexities that you just described?
Yeah, I think the real driving force, if you're going to do business internationally, is to be very flexible and open-minded, and be open to diverse ways of doing business, and not necessarily in the classic diversity, construct, but there's that also. But just, the way we do things in the United States may or may not be the best way. And certainly may or may not be the best way to go try to do something in somebody else's market, somebody else's culture. So approaching the whole thing with a sense of humility and a sense of open-mindedness and wanting to learn, and see what, doesn't mean that you may not have some ideas or way to go about doing things, coming from a US background that might not be helpful, but don't always assume it's the best, and be open to finding out that it's not, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I imagine that flexibility is absolutely critical. One of the things we hear in the program a lot, and a lot is probably an understatement, but it's that real estate, one thing matters, and that's your relationships. So get out there, network, build relationships. Is that true internationally? And if so, how do you go about either developing those relationships or operating in a market where, maybe you haven't had the exposure to build up relationships?
Yeah, I would say relationships matter probably even more in most, in many other markets outside the United States. And if you just, drew a spectrum from transactional to relationship-based markets, even within the US, by the way, we have variances along that spectrum, right? I mean, LA is traditionally a very transactional market. I mean, if you drive in and have a expense report and, on a cell phone, you can probably find people and do deals. Chicago, less so. I mean, people are doing deals with people they went to high school with, right? So that spectrum can go very far, but some cultures are just a lot more, whether it's real estate or just business, are a lot more relationship oriented. I mean, Mexico, for instance, it's all about the relationship, and you have to spend a fair amount of time forming the relationship, and then all transactions can happen. Some of that, variance, I think, also depends on the culture of lawyers and litigation, and how much things are documented versus how much things are a handshake. In Japan, they don't rely on lawyers as much. It's very much about face and relationships and things like that. So it's very important, and probably more important than most places in the US.
So everything we hear about developing those relationships clearly extends to working abroad.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I read from your background, you spent some time in China, but especially in a place like China, where there's the rule or the law, and then everything's open to interpretation, and everything needs government approval. Your ability to get things approved by the government depends a lot on your relationship with those government officials, and how you can explain to them what you're trying to do is really benefiting their goals for their community, whether it's tax basis or whatever. But the way the thing is decided is not necessarily written down. It's not checked the box. You do these 4 things and you get your approval. You do these 4 things and everything else is open to interpretation. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just a thing you need to realize when you go into it.
It's not better, it's not worse, it's just different.
It's just the way to do it.
Related a little bit to relationships, managing teams internationally. I think the world has gotten a very quick masterclass in remote teams, but that's existed for a while. If you work internationally, either working in the headquarters with a remote team, or working internationally and reporting back to headquarters. I would love to get your thoughts on managing teams internationally, and then, if it's appropriate, kind of dovetail that into the current situation with remote work and anything, how that might be related.
Yeah, I think the quick answer is managing teams internationally is really hard. Um, uh, Starting with logistics. I mean, I managed Europe and Asia, started up and managed Europe and Asia from San Francisco, which meant a lot of time, weird hours, and a lot of time on flights, notwithstanding current Zoom calls and stuff. 4 a.m. in San Francisco was noon in Paris before people went off to lunch, and it was 8 o'clock in Japan before people went home. And so I get up at 4 o'clock, and there would be 80 emails, and I'd comb through the first 10 that were really time critical and get those out before I took a shower. We're usually in the office at 5:30 in the morning. The good thing is, at 5 at night, I just come home and shut things down for a while. So, I mean, the other part of it is, while the Zoom and all this stuff is very helpful, there is nothing, like in-person communication. So I was regularly, 1 week in London, then back home for a week or 10 days, and then a week in China, then back at home a week or 10 days, and then, in Germany for a week, and then coming back, which I got really good at sleeping on planes. But it also meant that between that and getting up at 4 a.m, I was, for about 12 years, my body clock was never on a time zone. So, it's like training for any sport. You can work yourself into it where you think this is okay, but it's just hard travel. On the soft side of it, I would purposely try to spend a week in each location. Like, I'd go to Europe, I'd spend a week in Amsterdam in our office, not try to hit 10 cities in a week or something like that, because I wanted to get to know the people. And so I'd sit in a desk in that office and go out to dinners and stuff with those people, because I found it much more important to get to know them and how they would think, and strengths and weaknesses and stuff that you can only get a little bit by observation. So that when I was back in San Francisco getting an email for somebody or a recommendation from someone, I'd have a better understanding of where they were coming from. Also just understanding that those cultural differences, and I always sort of hesitate to make gross generalizations, but I'll give you 2 examples that occurred to me. And one was, I was in Japan, and the team said, "Hey, we want to show you a deal," and we go out and we look at the deal, and the people working on the deal knew every fact and every figure about this deal. They knew everything about the property, they knew everything about the market, they knew the sub-market, they knew all the stats, they knew who was in different buildings and who the players were. Then I would ask them, "Well, do you think this is a good deal?" And the deference automatically was, "Well, do you think it's a good deal?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm looking for your opinion. What do you think it's worth?" And it was like, "Well, what do you think it's worth?" I mean, and a short time later, I was in China. I was in a similar situation with a woman who was working on a deal that we were looking at doing, and we looked at it, and she knew all about the market and all that stuff. And and I asked her, I said, "Okay, well, the seller's listing this for whatever, $25 million. Do you like it?" She's like, "Absolutely, I like it." And I said, "Well, what do you think it's worth? What do you think we should do?" And she goes, "Oh, I don't think it's worth any more than 19.7 million, and we should come in at 15 with a bid. It's going to go like this, And she was all about a positive recommendation. Again, it doesn't mean that's right or the other way is wrong. It's just that when you're dealing with teams, and you have to understand what you're looking for, and what they're familiar or comfortable with providing.
Those are great anecdotes, and it's fun to see that difference, because it's not a professional competency, it's really a cultural competency that drives that, either not making the recommendation or making it.
Oh yeah, and again, cultural differences. But say, like, doing business in Warsaw, in Poland, just due to history, with their experience with communism, and then not having communism, being capitalist, the older generation, most of them had come up through non-capitalism, and we're not able to make that adjustment. So when you go to do business in Warsaw, the leaders of most of the organizations, or whether it's the accounting firm, the law firm, stuff like that, are very, very young, because the older generation was somewhat put out to pasture in capitalism. So you're likely to find, a culture of, if you're not running the office by 35, you're kind of a has-been. As opposed to Japan, again, which is just very more respectful with seniority and age and all of those things. So again, I'm not saying better or worse. I'm just saying you just have to know or learn, some of those cultural differences that you can be an old guy like me and go to Warsaw, and you probably aren't going to get respect because they're probably going to think you don't know anything.
I'm curious if somebody comes to you and they say, hey, I'm, finishing up my master's degree at the UW in real estate. I want to go work abroad. I want to go to London and work. What recommendations would you have for somebody in that situation?
It's a little bit tough, I'll just say, to do it that way. There are not that many international firms, right? There's Blackstone, there's a bunch of them, but there's not that many as opposed to sort of general real estate firms. So then you have to understand too that there is a cost and a friction for a company to send you or have you start working in another culture. The one you name, at least London, you speak English, right? And most of Europe, they're going to speak English, but that's not necessarily the case. Well, and it's not your primary language. And, even if you're just English speaking, it's tough to do business in Germany. Not that you can't, but it's tougher. So you have to be able to figure out what is your value proposition to your employer, what is the extra added value that you're going to provide that gets you over the logistical cost and cultural friction of you going there. What's the special secret sauce that you add? And I would think, I would just have to think about, how you make that presentation. I mean, I can imagine if you'd worked in Seattle for a company that's doing life science development, biotech, whatever, and that is just starting to expand in Singapore, something like that. You might find a company that says, oh, okay, well, he or she has specific skills on that we would like you to join the team. But if you're just sort of a generalist, I think it's just tougher, unless you lived in the country for a while, or maybe, again, knew somebody through your contacts in school. I mean, that you have classmates who, maybe from a, family business in Colombia or something like that, and they say, oh, our family would like you to come join the company. I mean, I've seen that happen before very successfully.
It definitely seems, at least kind of, earlier on in your career, you really have to find a way to marry that business expertise with some sort of cultural expertise. Otherwise, the value add just isn't quite there for the companies. Looking further on in your career, how would you look at it then? If I say, hey, I'm going to do my, not time, but I'm going to, build my career here in the States or Seattle. But I hope to one day, get that exposure abroad. How would you approach that?
Yeah, I think as much as possible, I would try to join a firm that had at least an international lens. I mean, if someone's going to spend 5 years in Seattle working for a local home builder versus going to work for Amazon in their in-house real estate department that is doing deals all over the world, okay, maybe you might not be in Brazil or in Germany or other places where Amazon is doing a lot of business. But you're probably going to bump up against it, and you may be able to get yourself assignments working on analyzing a deal in Brazil or something like that could at least give you that appreciation for what's happening versus, and again, I'm not just a parochial business. I don't mean parochial in a diminutive term. I'm just saying that if you want to do international, there's nothing like having exposure to international. As opposed to me, who had absolutely no exposure to international when I started A&B's international business. So don't do it my way.
Okay, so what is your secret sauce, Guy? You mentioned having people should have one. What's yours?
Mine was a series of fortunate situations where I was in the right place at the right time. I mean, literally at A&B, which is where I started. our non-US business. I mean, we were in 8 US markets when the executive team, of which there were like 4 or 5 of us, decided that we needed to grow our business internationally because our customers were international. The global supply chain, FedEx, whoever, they move boxes around the world. So while we could service a customer in Chicago, we couldn't service them at Tokyo Narita Airport or the Port of Hamburg. So we decided to build that international platform, and there were 4 of us looking around going, "Oh, okay, great idea. Who's going to do this?" And I raised my hand and was like, "All right, you're stupid enough to go try to do this. Go ahead." And that's how I got the job. So I mean, so I guess the secret of the sauce is, when in doubt, raise your hand and say, "Yeah, I can do that. Of course I can do that." And then go figure it out as fast as possible.
All right. Well, good. Well, you're not getting up at 4 a.m. and checking emails in 3 time zones now. I'm sure you're kind of pivoted to that next phase of life. So with this phase you're in now, what do you do with your available time? What's your passion?
Yeah, so I am, I guess, retired or semi-retired. I've divided my portfolio time up into 3 different buckets, if you will. So just like you'd build an investment portfolio, mind, body, and soul. So for the mind part, I spend about 1/3 of my time on boards, private companies, public companies, that kind of stuff, family office. About 1/3 of the time running, working out, trying to keep, relatively in shape and not get COVID. And then about 1/3 of my time writing, recording music, putting out my weekly COVID couch concert series, that sort of thing. And that can round out a week. I would say the most rewarding thing I get to do these days is I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Operation Encore that helps military veterans, singer-songwriters, with their professional music careers. So we've got a number of artists that we're conducting songwriting workshops and recording demos for them and booking gigs, and it's a very hands-on board. We have no paid staff, so I'm in studios and flying out to music festivals to make sure these guys get to their stage on time, and it's just a hell of a lot of fun.
Great. So how do people follow that and see some of those that you produced?
So a number of things. Operation Encore, you can go to operationencore.org. There's a podcast series that I co-host where I interview these people. If you can't find it on the website or anything like that, just email me. I'll send people stuff. My own stuff is my record label, Buckeye Road Music. You can find all the stuff I've professionally recorded on Spotify. There's about 40 or so songs that I wrote and recorded with various artists. And then my weekly COVID couch concert series, which I'm recording episode number 55 this week, by the way. You can get on YouTube, but just look for Buckeye Road COVID couch concert series. If you can't get all those, again, email me or something and I'll send you a link. I will say that I don't do social media. I think it's evil. So I'm not on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Instacart, or any of those. So I'll do email and eventually put some stuff on YouTube, but I'm a little bit hard. Since graduating from a publicly traded company, I've made myself a little bit harder to find.
Great. Well, amazing. And I got to see some of the ones you did on there. And I love the one I'm going to share with some attorney friends recently that you did. So what fun to do. And gosh, we greatly appreciate you coming on with us today, sharing all your life experiences. We'll put some links in the video as well so people can find some of that stuff that you've done. So thanks so much for coming on today, Guy.
All right. You take care. Thank you very much. Nolan, thanks.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.